constructed, and what kind of meaning you can put into it. And I'll give you a couple of ideas along the way. So this isn't going to be a long presentation. Renee really wanted me to finish by 7:45, and I think we'll do that easily. If there are questions along the way, it's a small group, so feel free to break in. But I'll just give you some, let's say, a general tour of sacred spaces and how they might be constructed and what you might want to think about as we start to enter the holidays. So we'll start off as asking what is sacred or holy space? I mean, what do the words mean at all? So I collected a couple of different definitions of or relating to religion that is not secular or profane. That's Merriam-Webster. That's probably about as standard as you're going to get. Or Cambridge English Dictionary, again, for sacred is connected with religion, which I find a little bit flat, but I think it's a very common definition because sacred can be beyond religion, as we'll talk about in a moment. But I think the first one, the Merriam-Webster, I like because it's not secular or profane. It's something that's not everyday, something that's a little bit different, that has a feel about it that's not your everyday. And that's maybe what we want to get away from as we approach the high holidays. Merriam-Webster defines, then there are two definitions of holy: dedicated or consecrated to God or a religious purpose. So maybe that's more what we think about as holy, dedicated to a religious purpose. And then also Merriam-Webster having a divine quality. Divine here being a pretty general term because you can have holiness in all kinds of religions that are even atheistic like Buddhism or polytheistic like Hinduism, but you can still have a sense of a divine quality. And then I figured I ought to throw in a very Jewish one, and that is Kedusha. And the basic meaning of kadosh is separation. So something set apart, something that's different from the secular or the profane or the everyday. So on the Torah.com, anything closely connected to God receives its sanctity, its Kedusha, from the divine Kedusha. The sanctity of a place derives from the presence of God there. And I liked that and thought I'd present it because I want you to think a little bit about what does it mean about the presence of God there. On the one hand, of course, God is everywhere. We can feel Kedusha in all sorts of different places. But is there something specifically we can do at home or wherever it is you're going to be that indicates the presence of God in a more maybe direct way so that you start to feel some of the Kedusha as well? And that's kind of where I want to take our discussion. How do you infuse a sense of Kedusha? So having said all that, a space, especially in Judaism, a space can have Kedusha, it can have divine presence, however you want to define that, as part of community. And this is especially true in more traditional Jewish communities, but it's a place, such as I'm showing here the Western Wall, which has a Kedusha because it's understood to have the presence of God because it represents the temple. And I've also put an image of a Shabbat meal because it's a communal setting. It's when we have our family together or our friends and close ones. And when we gather together with family and friends in a Jewish holy time, then it also, that simple gathering itself is a sign of Kedusha. We've come together in the divine name or in the divine presence or for a divine purpose. But I also wanted to say that it doesn't have to be communal. You can have a very separate space. You can get away from your spiritual self, so away from the world and all of its troubles. So many people might have a corner or a place or in the house or outside where you just kind of get away. And if that is for your spiritual self and you feel a spirituality, then that's a sort of sacred space. It has Kedusha insofar as you have a sense of the divine presence in it. And then what we know anthropologically is that sacred spaces have particular structures sometimes. So I wanted to talk for just a second about sacred time, because in Judaism we have a lot of sacred time. And I was going to take my example from Shabbat. So Shabbat has a beginning when we enter into the holy time from ordinary, secular, profane. There's rituals we go through. We light the candle, we say the Kiddush, we do very specific things to inaugurate the Sabbath. Or the Sabbath is inaugurated by nature. If we do nothing, Friday night, 3 stars appear, it's Shabbat. And it has an end, which when we also transition back to normal, or secular or profane time, and so I've got a picture here of the Havdalah set. So we know that it has a beginning, it has a middle period of Kedusha, when our lives should be structured a little bit differently than what we normally do day to day. And then at the time of Havdalah, we transition back into the everyday world. For me, for example, among the things I do is I turn off my computer Friday night after services, and then don't turn it on again till near sundown. And so I'm away from emails and all this other kind of stuff, and that creates a little bit of a holy time for me. So anyway, I wanted you to think of the structure of there's a beginning, an entry into, and then a period of holy time, and then an exit or a way back into the secular world. So when we talk about sacred space, we think in similar terms, that it sometimes has an entrance and an exit. It has a transition period or a transition space, which we often call liminal. It's a boundary between the sacred and the profane, between the everyday and the sacred. And if you do create a sacred space for yourself for the holidays, you can think about a liminal boundary. Is it a room you wouldn't go into normally, or is it some way of indicating that you're passing from one domain or one realm into another? So I'm giving you here what is an old standard Greek architectural layout of how these things go. You would come in over at this side, on the right-hand side, where it says colonnade or peristyle, and there's an entrance in which you enter the compound, and that's when you kind of leave the secular world. You then go into the pronaos, and that's the real liminal period. You're not out, but you're not quite in. And then the cella or the naos is really the sacred space. The other, the epistodemus, is has to do with, where the God is actually present. It has more to do with what generates the holiness. This has been taken over by churches. This is where the choir would be in a traditional church, or where the relics would be. That is not a place where you would normally go, but which infuses the rest of the church with Kedusha, if I can use that word. So you have the pronaos when you kind of really leave the secular world, and then you have the cella when you're in the sacred space. So it has that same kind of structure. And when you go out, you also go out through the pronaos, then into the colonnade, and then down into the everyday world. So the cella or the naos, or the really kind of holy place you want to create, can be structured to do a number of different things. For example, it can be a sense of awe, of holiness, of something that raises your eyes up to the heavens, and you're struck by maybe your humility or your smallness in front of God, or kind of the awesomeness of creation. So that's one thing a sacred space can do, and for some religions, this is really what's important about sacred space. For other religions, it's more private. It's a sense of contemplation, a sense when you are with yourself alone in the woods. You might have a sacred grove of trees, a sacred place, special place you want to go, or you can kind of feel you're communing with nature. So it can be a huge building that inspires certain feelings. It can be just a quiet place of contemplation. It can also be very intensely personal. And in Judaism, this tends to be more what we do, as have very personal moments of communion with God inside a tallis. A synagogue might not be an awesome building. It might not be awe-inspiring like a cathedral, although there are synagogues that are. But it's a place not only of communal worship, but then of a place where you can wrap yourself in the tallis, so to speak, and really have an intensely personal experience. And that can be a sacred space as well. It doesn't have to be a big thing.
I can barely see them.
What's that? My pictures?
Yeah, they're just in a little.
Oh, if the pictures are really small, you need to click on. What do you need to click on? You can control how you see the pictures by clicking on the grid video, if that's what you've got. And if you click on that, it should reduce. There's like a line there, and if you click that, it'll reduce your pictures and open up what I'm sharing. It'll open.
And if it's a touch screen, you can just push it with your fingers.
Yeah, and that'll open up the share screen. So here is the very personal picture. So that kind of brings me to my part two, is you want to create something for the high holidays. And I love this picture, your sacred spaces, where you can find yourself again and again. This is just a wonderful little romantic picture. But for the high holidays, you might want to find something that somehow expresses your own sense of what the Kedusha is that you're looking for during the period. It's not going to be the synagogue. It's not going to be the communal aspect because of, this coronavirus. But you might think of ways of turning a room or a part of a room into a place that is special for you during the high holidays. And what I want to do is give you a couple of ideas of how you might do that. So I've got here several different house shrines. These are all just a table against a wall or in a corner of a room. There are various different traditions. The one on the left with the flame is Hindu. The one on the right, you can see the little Buddha statue between the flowers. And the one sort of in the middle is, as you can obviously tell, is Catholic with the Virgin Mary and a little bit of a, scene of some of the saints and so forth. So these are ways of creating a small little house altar or place in your home that convey a sort of holy place. Unfortunately, we really don't have any Jewish tradition about that. Jewish holy spaces are either communal or there's something you create around yourself. But home shrines has never been a particularly Jewish thing. We've always had either synagogues or public places like the Wailing Wall that have historical significance. For some people, it might be a graveyard or something like that. So there is no real model for a Jewish home shrine, but I'm going to give you some suggestions or ideas anyway if you want to pursue this. One is paper cuts, and I think we've kind of lost the tradition, but paper cutting of these kinds of things was a very common folk art in Jewish communities of Central and Eastern Europe in the 18th and 19th century. And as you can see, the one on the left is quite elaborate, and actually so is the one on the right. What the one on the right shows is you can take these wood cuttings, these paper cuttings, and put colored paper behind them. So on the one on the left, it's just on sort of standard white paper or slightly gray paper. But the one on the right has a backing of colored paper, and that gives a coloration behind it. And when the Maltz Museum reopens, they have a number of these on display, and you can see some really nicely done paper cuttings with different kind of color backgrounds, which are quite impressive. But these were typical for Jewish homes. Like I say, in Central and Eastern Europe in the last century or two. So there's other ways of doing this. You don't all have to become experts in cutting these things out. And the one on the left, the blue one, above where the crown is, you can see where the lions are kind of putting their paws. There's the Hebrew word Mizrach, and that means east. And Mizrach is where the sun rises, but it's also where you face in prayer. So this was a Mizrach, it's called, and it was meant to be put in the direction of Jerusalem so that you're kind of looking east. And in the corners, there are 4 Hebrew words, and they say, on this side is the spirit of life. So you've created something like a Jewish home shrine, I guess, with a Mizrach. If you face it and you're facing out towards Jerusalem, and this is the direction in which the Kedusha of Jerusalem is flowing into your house. So I thought the Mizrach was at least some way of getting you to think about one way of doing that. And I just like the other one because it serves the same purpose, even though it's not calling itself a Mizrach. Here's 2 other Mizrachs. So the one on the left is not a paper cutout, obviously, it's something else. On the very top, it says a Mizrach, so that you know that's what it is. It's got a Jewish star, or the 6-pointed star, a picture of what I assume is supposed to be Jerusalem or Tiberias. And it says in the bottom, from the rise of the sun, that's Mizrach, the eastern, the easternness of the sun. So from the rise of the sun until it's going down, we praise the name of God. Now, this particular one is rather Zionistic. It has the 6-pointed stars. It has the picture of, like I say, I think Jerusalem, but it is a Mizrach. And then there's another paper cut on the right, and I put that one here because it's also sort of got a picture of what I think is supposed to be the temple in Jerusalem or something like that. And you can see the gates and so forth. So it's almost like if you face that, you're facing the gates that will open you up into the tabernacle or into Jerusalem or something like that. So there's all kinds of Mizrachs. You can probably print some out from online. There's all kinds of varieties and orientations. But these are one thing that are very typical for creating a direction for prayer and a way of Kedusha from Jerusalem to coming into your own house, into your own being. Another symbol is the 7-branched menorah. This was what was in the temple in Jerusalem, and this is really the symbol of Jerusalem, of Judaism. The 6-pointed star was brought in more by the Zionist movement, even though now we think it's very Jewish. It's really more of a Zionist symbol that became universal. But the 7-branched menorah is really the historical symbol of Judaism. And that's what I have on the left, this big sort of statue, is out in front of the Knesset in Jerusalem. And it's because it's the symbol of the state of Israel. And, or I should say, the symbol of the Jewish people. The 6-pointed star has become more of the symbol of Israel, but the menorah is always the symbol of the Jewish people. So that's another symbol you might use. Could even use it as a Mizrach or some other way of reminding you of the communal aspect and the historical aspect of the Jewish people, because the menorah really represents that. It was set up in the tabernacle in the wilderness and has become a symbol all the way through. So I thought I'd give you a few more symbols just to think about, and then we can have a few minutes for discussion. So there's lots of Jewish symbols, depending on your route into Judaism. So you can see the menorah here is the 9-candle one for Hanukkah, which is not particularly, the traditional Jewish symbol, but it can be used because it does represent kind of Jewish creativity and holiness and the miracles of God. I've got a small Torah scroll. In Greco-Roman culture, very often there was something in the back part of the temples, of the Greco-Roman temples and Hellenistic temples, in which there was something that gave the Kedusha. That survives in many churches as where the relic is. So churches used to have relics of the saints or relics of who after the church was named after. I remember taking a class once to the Church of the Covenant down on Euclid Avenue. It's and those kinds of churches, the Presbyterian churches, Episcopalian churches, still have something that gives it Kedusha. So I asked them about, well, what do you have in your altar? What makes the altar holy? And they said, oh, we have a stone that was brought over from Scotland. So you can, I guess, generate your Kedusha or your sacred object from all sorts of different ways. I included also a shofar because, well, it's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We hear the shofar. That itself you may find as a symbol that brings you into the holiday. Talking about that, what seems to me would be pertinent symbols are the symbols of Sukkot, which comes 5 days after Yom Kippur. And this whole 15 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur to Sukkot, it actually runs through 23 days because you have the 7 days of Sukkot and Simchas Torah, is really a holiday of renewal, of life, of nature, of, in some sense, rebirth. It's the end of the dry summer and the beginning of the rainy season. So there are a lot of religious symbolisms that go along with this holiday. And again, depending on how you think about nature and this time of year, these might be symbols that you would find helpful in a little bit of a home shrine. So I wanted to end with this little statement that we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So as we approach Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the high holidays, it's maybe also to think about what we've experienced the last year, what this year of COVID has been, what this has meant for the Jewish community and Jewish communal life, and to shape for yourself a sacred space or a direction of prayer or something that helps you reflect on where we've been these last several months and where we are and where we might be headed. So it's a chance really for us on these holy days just to reflect on our experience and what it has meant for us, and to do that in a way that we can be very creative about in our own homes or wherever we're staying. So with that, I wish everybody a Lashana Tova, and we can see if there are any questions or discussions.
Oh, okay.
So I have unmuted everyone. If you guys want to unmute yourself, you've chosen to continue to mute. If anybody has any questions for Peter?
Yeah, I do, Peter.
Sure.
Thank you for putting that together. That really is helpful to start thinking in advance about being purposeful rather than the space that I do my work and connect for Shabbat services. And, it's basically the place I'm sitting right now where I've been.
Right. I recognize the room.
Hours of Zoom meetings. So that's really helpful. Something I'm struggling with, anxious about, Mark may be feeling the same way, is that we've been told that we're going to be bringing the Torah into our homes, those of us who are reading Torah on holy days. And is there any special provision? I realize this has got to be somewhat unprecedented, but is there any tradition for safe handling or placement in the home or anything, any guidance like that, because, you know, it's going to feel weird to just put it down on my kitchen table or my dining room table to read. So I think it has to do with sacred space. So I wonder if you have any insights for me.
Yeah, I have two or three things I could say. One, yeah, you shouldn't put it on the kitchen table. I mean, if you have a special place or a special corner, or even set up, I don't know if I want to say a household shrine, but a special table with a nice, you know, to put it on, because you want to treat it with some honor. And the other thing is, when you're not using it, you should keep it covered. Have a blanket on it, or I don't know, these are kind of big, aren't they? I was going to say pillowcase, but that might be, but you know, keep it kind of covered until you're ready to use it. And again, it's a way of showing it honor a little bit. The same way we don't have open coffins, right? You want to kind of respect the dignity of the deceased person. So those would be my two pieces of advice.
Rabbi Denker said that it would be covered with a tallit.
Oh, with a tallit?
Yeah.
That would perfectly work, yeah. So just, yeah, keep it covered that way, yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
Did I stun everybody into silence?
Rabbi, I have a question. This is Michelle. Is the Mizrachi something that really observant Jews use in their homes?
Yes, and I have seen observant homes with it. Yeah, they really do.
They're talking about the Mizrachi.
Because it's only not telling you, oh yeah, it's this wall, but it does kind of represent that this connection or this nexus between Jerusalem and you. So it really has a very representative sense that way.
So we need to have one, is what they're talking
Thank you.
Yeah.
Peter,
Lillian, yeah.
what I was going to say is that for me, I'm most spiritual at that time when I'm outside. And
Okay.
under by trees and the sky, because I feel that creativity from God. That's why the earth is what it is. So that's when I feel the most spiritual.
Yeah. And you're far from alone in that. And maybe if you do something in your house, if you have a patio or something like that, you could do it there. So that brings you a little bit into nature, and
That's what I was thinking of doing, just that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea.
To do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter,
Yeah.
a question about, I noticed that among the symbols, you did not have a mezuzah.
Right.
Any reason for that?
No.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
yes, there is a reason. I didn't think about it.
Okay.
So, yeah, you caught me. Yeah, a mezuzah is also a way of, and actually, now that I think about it, a mezuzah would have been a good symbol because it represents the doorway from going to the, what do I want to say, the non-Jewish world into the Jewish world, in a sense, from the public domain into the private domain.
Yeah.
So that's that liminal period, or liminal space, where you're marking the portal from the one to the other.
Where are we going to situate ourselves?
So when I do this next year, when we're still under lockdown, God forbid,
You put it in. Okay.
I'll put it in.
Rabbi,
you.
when I was researching this a couple months ago, what I was reading was that the original sanctuaries were created after the temple was destroyed. And the rabbis were putting in symbols into the sanctuary to represent the original temple.
Right.
So the origin of the seven-stalk
Where do you see a yellow cord?
was something that was in
Where do you see a
great
yellow
temple.
cord?
Right.
So that I'm thinking that if we're creating sacred space in our homes, we're trying to recreate something that was in our own sanctuary.
Yeah. And that's another good point. And by the way, if you think about Shabbat meal, I mean, what was in the sanctuary? What was in the original tabernacle and the sanctuary? There was the sacred bread, the showbread. There was the menorah with the candles. There was wine for the offerings. There was meat, which, so all the stuff we do Friday night is recreating a little bit the sanctuary, the candles, the wine, the bread, the challah, all of that. So yes, that's where a lot of our rituals come from. We're remembering or reenacting in a metaphorical way. The ancient temple or the tabernacle. So yeah, that is a very good point.
So along those lines, what would be representative of the high holidays that we would create a symbol in our own home?
Shofar. It depends what kind of moves you about the holidays and what, there's not a standard procedure here. So that's why I gave that whole melange of different kinds of things. I think even symbols from Sukkot would work. If you manage to find a scapegoat, you could use that, but that gets gets a little bit more difficult. There's that famous painting of a scapegoat. I forget the guy's name. Was it Hudson? You find a picture of that and print it out. If that's the kind of thing that puts you in a mood of holiness or awesomeness, that would be a possibility. If remembering the temple somehow rings a bell with you, then challah, candles, things like that, or even an image of the temple. And you saw some of the Mizrachs do that. Yeah.
Peter, this doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about tonight, but
Oh, great.
it's to do with Tashlich.
Okay.
Because in everything that came from temple today, I didn't see anything about Tashlich. And so, I have a pond across the street from where I live, but I don't know if my development would like me throwing bread in it. Roy and I discussed it at dinner, and we decided we're going to go to Temple Emmanuel and do Tashlich there, because that's going to bring us back into, it's outside, and it'll bring us back into the feeling of what it usually is like.
I really like that. That's very nice. Yeah. I hadn't even thought about Tashlich, but yeah, I mean, we have Doan Brook, we could throw a little piece of bread. I don't think they'll mind. But to go to was it Lake Emmanuel is an interesting idea.
Yeah,
and it connects you back with the temple for 5 minutes, right?
Yes, and it's outside, but it's the feeling of that's where we usually are. So but we do that.
Ooh, that's a terrific idea. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I live by Acacia Reservation. I don't think they're going to want me throwing bread into the ponds and rivers there either.
Yeah, probably not.
I would go to the temple.
Yeah. Or go to the lakefront or something. Right. So, yeah, that's interesting though. Yeah, they didn't say anything about Tashlich, and we need to figure out a way of getting that done.
Mm-hmm. That was actually intentional. That everybody could do Tashlich on their own, and we are going to have a PDF sent out with the Tashlich service.
Okay.
It's William Holman Hunt painted the scapegoat, Peter.
Holman Hunt, yes. And people either love that picture or they really find it repulsive.
Say his name again, David.
William Holman Hunt. So Holman's the middle name. William Hunt, the scapegoat.
I'll have to look it up.
And it's this bedraggled, poor little goat sitting there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
I just find that a very, it's a very moving and awesome picture, just in its sort of humbleness and almost awfulness. But yeah. Any other thoughts or suggestions? There's been some good suggestions.
So I do want to share, as Lillian said, the high holiday mailing went out. Everybody should have received it today. If not, they'll get it by tomorrow. Hopefully there's no USPS issues with everybody receiving it. And there's
It's not an
plenty of
election, so we're
information
okay.
in there about the high holidays. If there are any questions that come up, there are a series of email addresses along with my cell phone number, so you can talk to the appropriate person or just give me a call. I do want to thank, let's see, Dr. Rabbi Professor Peter Haas for this webinar. Really appreciate Peter leading us and providing us with some valuable information. And I also want to invite everybody to join us again on Monday, August 24th for biblical readings for the high holidays, which Rabbi Danker will lead us with. Thank you so, so very much. And again, thank you, Peter.
Thank you, everyone. Good
And
night.
good seeing you all, and stay safe.
Thanks, Peter. Yasha Koach.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.